All right, welcome everybody to Secretary Club Officer Training, the TLI. My name is Megan Koehler, and I am from Stark State Toastmasters. I have been a secretary and I am currently a VP of Ed, and I welcome you all today to this training. And I'm very happy to introduce our main host, my co-host here, Aziz. So please welcome Aziz, who recently just earned his DTM.
Thank you, Megan. Everyone, so I'll be your co-trainer for today. So I and Megan decided both are gonna present the club officer training. Megan will go ahead and present the first half of the club secretary role training, and I'll be doing the second half. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Megan.
I do want to start off today by asking, has anyone participating in this training been a secretary before? And if you want to go ahead and pop that in the chat window, just let us know if you have been a secretary before. So our agenda for this training today, we're going to cover 3 areas: the role of the secretary within the club, the responsibilities that secretaries have, and some resources that you can use to help do your secretary role in your job most effectively for your club. So by the end of our training today, these are your action verbs. You'll be able to identify your role within the club. You'll be able to fulfill your responsibilities because you'll know what your responsibilities are. And you'll be able to find resources that will help you be the best secretary you can be. A secretary role. I want you to think of the secretary role as the historian and the documentarian of your club. As secretary, your main role is to keep track of all the paperwork, keep things organized. So some of those documents that you'll need, sign-in sheets, guest book logs, agendas, you are in charge, and at your officer meetings. And that is your role, is just to document and keep track of all that paperwork, or documents if you're doing electronically. And I want to make sure I note that the secretary role, what we're talking about today, these are just guidelines. What your role looks like in your own individual club may be different. And I see that we have some veteran secretaries here, which means they'll have a lot of strategies, tools, and tips that they'll share throughout as well. There are 3 areas, main areas of responsibility for secretaries: within the club meeting itself, outside of the club meeting, and in the executive committee. Inside the club meeting, one of your key roles and responsibilities is being there before the club meeting starts. 10 to 15 minutes before your actual club meeting starts, to make sure you have all the paperwork you need, making sure you have documentation laid out and prepared, an agenda for the meeting, making sure that is ready as well. When you arrive at the club meeting, that's one of the things you're going to make sure you have all of those paperwork, you're ready to take notes, have a notebook handy. And during the club meeting, you take note of the roles that people play. For my club, during the club meeting, what our secretary does is keep track of our guest sign-in sheet and our sign-in sheet, making sure that all of our members have signed in for the day. And they also take the timer sheet that we have, and our secretary handles that as well, just to keep track of who spoke and for how long. But just during the club meeting, taking notes and keeping track. Another area of importance, of most importance for secretaries, is meeting minutes. So taking notes during club meetings and during officer meetings is one of the most important roles that a secretary can play. You take those notes and you translate them into meeting minutes. And what I did, I actually have a sample of my meeting minutes that I can share with everyone later and show you what my template looks like. But there are multiple templates to translate your notes into meeting minutes. And there's also a lot of templates and resources available to help you in terms of taking good notes. One of the most important skills you'll practice as a secretary is active listening and being able to listen while taking good notes that are detailed. Because those meeting minutes we'll share through officer meetings and at the club level, those are shared so that everyone knows what is going on in the club. So it's important to have detailed minutes, and you want to translate your notes to meeting minutes immediately after the meeting, so it's all still fresh in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Another responsibility for secretaries is working with the president, making sure they have the action items that they need and the agenda is ready for them. And another responsibility is updating the club's officer list, which is coming up right here at the end of June. And then another key role is circulating the attendance sheet and the guest book. As secretary, like I said, your job is to document and to keep records. And it helps if you have a member who is wondering, hey, was I at that meeting? I don't remember which meeting I spoke at. The secretary will have those records. And the secretary can work hand in hand with the VP of Education to help make sure members' meetings, their speeches, and their projects are completed, and they have that record of when they spoke. Okay. I think now is the time that I turn over to Aziz, who's going to do the second half.
All right. This is called the slide called during club meetings. Read previous minutes, note amendments, record current meeting minutes. So you, as a club secretary, as Megan said, you're responsible for taking notes, noting any amendments, and notifying your club members of any changes. And I'll tell you one of my personal stories, what I did during club meetings. I'm first of all a member of a Westlake Toastmasters Club, and we do meet in a Westlake Porter Public Library. And I remember at one meeting, we were there, during prepared speeches, we heard some crosstalks, and even during that speech, there were some cell phones ringing. So in the evaluation part 3, the general evaluator brought this up, that we heard some crosstalks, that there were cell phones ringing. We should try to minimize noise. I note this down. The next time we meet at a club officer meeting, I brought this up, that we were hearing some crosstalk, some chatting that can disrupt the flow of the meeting. And I discussed it with the club officer, especially the president, and the next time we met, the president brought this up and said, well, please, before we start, turn your cell phones off. If you need to talk to someone while the meeting is run, then grab a strip of paper, write something, and pass it on. We don't want those crosstalk to happen very often. We don't want to disrupt the meeting in any way. So, Megan, could you click the next slide? All right. Yes, outside the club meeting. So your responsibility as a club secretary comes in before, during, and after or outside the club meeting. What are you supposed to do when outside the club meetings? First of all, maintain accurate roster. Just remember your roster list changes on a frequent basis, like every few weeks, every 6 months. So you need to be aware of the members who have renewed their membership, members who are away for some reason. Yes, well, of course, that is the main responsibility of Vice President of Membership, but as a club secretary, don't think that your role is small. No, your role is as big as any other vice president, because you can be the link between all club officers. And second, you submit club officer list. Well, that is something that we used to do. In my club, you may do it in a different way. In our club, we have our own shared Google Drive. And what we do whenever one club officer probably needs to step down, so I used to note this down, and then we try to look for alternatives. Who would be the next vice president of membership? Who would be the next or the club vice president of public relationships? You're supposed to note this down, because the next time you meet with your executive meeting, you need to address this right away. So your club management can go very smoothly. The third thing, will handle correspondence. Well, as a club secretary, your president may ask you to write an email, like a meeting recap. And in that recap, you might mention who did what was the prepared speech, well, what was the theme of the meeting, who won table topics, who won the best evaluator, and so on. That's called what you try to handle correspondence. If you try to get your present message across to the other club officer or members. Fourth thing, club files. Well, that is something that you should arrange for all the time, something that you should discuss how you want to do it. Until in the clubs I'm in, we handle this online, because sometimes you tend to lose paper. And one of the ways is not to lose paper is save everything on our devices, on computer or on the cloud, on Google Drives. The last thing, and for me just the most important thing, attend club executive committee meetings. Yes, as a club secretary, try to attend every meeting. And not only that, try to arrive a few minutes early. Because you, as a club secretary, you're supposed to take notes, discussions, suggestions, votes. This is called your responsibility. And of course, during that club meeting, you take some notes, and like Megan said, you transfer them to complete sentences, to meeting minutes, have those minutes proofread by the president, and then share it or circulate it with every other club members. So let's see the next slide, Megan. All right. Here's our other task: vote at international business meeting, facilitate member progress in base camp, arrange for replacement or assistance, prepare your successor for office. Yeah, I think I briefly talk about some of them, but let me show on the last one: prepare your successor for office. Let's suppose you're halfway through the Toastmaster year. You're in December or in January, and you think that you'll be traveling, you will be away. You're as a club secretary. So just a few weeks before you leave your club or don't show up for meeting, think of your successor. Who can take over? If that person is new, has never been a club secretary, then invite that person to our executive meeting. So he or she can grasp the club business meeting, can understand you as a club secretary, what you're supposed to do. And the best thing called observe and then participate. That's the best way you can learn. Here for the executive committee, read the previous meeting minutes, note and record current meeting minutes. Yeah, that's what I did. Read the previous meeting minutes. I normally bring this up at the very beginning of the meeting, just a recap, a reminder of what was discussed in the last meeting. in case there are any updates, then I note this down during the meeting. If there is any topic or any matter that needs to be further discussed, then I note this down and keep a record of it. And lastly, I call record current meeting events. Each meeting must have a date. If there's an issue that is done or a matter that is closed, then it's closed. If it's a matter that needs further amendment, further discussion, then keep it on. Next slide, Megan. All right. Now, well, Megan and I thought we should try to make this workshop two-way communication. It's not only you hear from her or you hear from me. I'm just glad that a good number of you have already served as a club secretary. So we'd like to ask some questions, open to the floor. How to fill the secretary responsibilities. So let's start with the first question, how? Is there anyone who would like to jump in and answer this question? How do you fulfill the club secretary responsibilities? And speak.
I'll be back.
Well, when is fulfilling the responsibilities basically as soon as possible by generating the meeting minutes as soon as you can after the meeting?
Yeah. All right.
You just want 1 point per person.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So let's try the second question. When do you fulfill your responsibility as a club secretary? Anyone?
Most definitely after each meeting, so that you can, like you said, make your notes as soon as the meeting is over. You know, we'll do your conclusion so that you can share it with everybody at the conclusion of each meeting.
Yeah, you're a very good observant. And so you noticed in the notes, we had 2 slides for outside club meetings. So it's called the majority of the club's secretary responsibility lies outside the club meetings. All right, is there anyone who would like to try who? All right.
For who, a good side question for this might be, who do you collaborate with the most, or who do you partner with the most as secretary? Who's as secretary?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you collaborate with the. Oh, I don't want to answer that. Let other people answer. So, as a club secretary, who do you collaborate with? Yeah, that's a better way of putting it in words.
I know for me it was the president, but I was also told during my last go round that my notes were too detailed. So it's always good to find out exactly what they want as far as you giving the minutes in the next meeting, exactly what it is they want to hear versus what they don't, because a lot of it, I guess, they just felt wasn't necessary to repeat. So I guess it's good to be clear on exactly what they want from you versus all of the notes you take.
I would think that it would be who did what, who was Toastmaster, who was GE, who won the best speaker, and so forth.
Yes, that's all of your excellent answers. I really like your inputs, all of you.
I think a key takeaway, though, is knowing what it is that people want or need, right? Because the role is to serve the club. And so in our case, for instance, we don't review meeting minutes from the previous club action because everything is posted. And in our case, we're a corporate club. Everyone has immediate access to those meeting minutes. So it's a little bit different than for an open club.
Right.
Actually, I was and is this new secretary for the West Side Advance Club, and as an advance meeting, I collaborate with all the officers and with everybody, all the members, just to make sure that everything was well run. So I kind of work with everybody.
All right, that's very good answers. Thank you all very much. Now, let's move to the last question, what? And I'd like to ask this question in a different way. What will happen to your club if there was no club secretary? What can you anticipate would happen?
Most likely with us, the duties would unfortunately fall to another member, and which would mean that they would end up having to do double duty, which is something we do quite a bit in our club. I mean, we'll take on the additional challenge. Ultimately, it should be passed to someone who doesn't have a role or have that, is not involved in the officers, but in order to make sure it's covered, it would just fall to someone else.
So I say one of the club officer will have to do double roles, which is, of course, that's not very good as far as management is concerned.
Right.
But what will happen to members or guests if there was no club secretary? What do you think would happen?
If you don't record everything that you need to record with international, you lose your credibility with international, and you don't get your points for your DCPM. And if you don't keep track of your guests, you can't invite them to become members.
Yeah. See, yeah, oh, absolutely right. See the mess your club will be in if there was no club secretary. It's very important that you record, you call the important parts of a club meeting as far as members, public relations, meeting minutes, club executive. As a club secretary, you are big and you undertake huge responsibility for your club to succeed. And Isabel, in the Toastmaster tradition, one way to measure your success is your DCP points. Talk about members, speeches, accomplishments, trainings, and who facilitates all of that? The club secretary. All right, Megan, can I see the next slide? All right. Okay, I think all of you can read the questions. If there's anyone who would like to jump in and answer any question or make any comment, please go ahead.
She said, my mentor slash current president says she's available to assist me.
That is great. Always ask people who are experienced, who have done your role before. And if you see Matt Kinsey's speech today, that's how we call you build confidence. We call you build confidence by taking responsibilities. You build confidence by taking smaller roles and you proceed through. You build on your smaller role and so on. This year, you will serve as a club officer. Next year, you can do an area director. Year after, you will do division director and so on. All right. Megan, unless somebody wants to jump in, let's move on to the next. Oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah,
I just have a quick question. Have we covered the role of base camp manager that the secretary plays?
No, not yet.
Okay.
The checklist. All right. Regarding the checklist.
All right. So we'll finish. We'll go through. Yep.
The resources. We're going to share the checklist resources with all of you. Actually, we're going to share the file, you will see that in the chat box where you can download it. These are called a summary of our workshop today. As a secretary, I've called a checklist. What are you supposed to do before, during, and after the meeting? So let's move on. Megan. All right. This slide talks about if you are new, if this is your first time taking a club secretary role, then how do you get started? The first checkbox is, or column, attend district-sponsored club officer training program, which is what you all are doing today. Attend, so you are aware, you know what a club secretary role is, what are your responsibilities, and how important are you. The second thing, get started, read some materials. There are plenty of materials on the Toastmasters.org. There are some handbooks about the role of the secretary. Meet with outgoing executive committee. If you know someone in your club who's handing over this role to you, then meet with them, ask some questions, because your club has its own personality, its own way of doing things. And as a club secretary, you should adapt to their needs. Meet with outgoing secretary, meet with current executive committee. Yeah, that is very important, especially next month in July, where the Toastmaster year will begin. Introduce yourself to the president, vice president of education, membership, public relation, and treasurer. So all of you are on the same page, and make sure that you meet with you have a club business meeting at least, like, if you want to do it twice a month or once a month, but it must be done on a regular basis. Confirm submission of the newly elected officers lists. And that's, of course, what happens when the president asks you to cast some votes, when your club is on an election cycle, asking members to cast votes or can be a presumptive nominee. So make sure you record those minutes and votes and results and keep a record of it, and then share it with your club officers. Finally, review and order any needed material. And then again, keeping a record. So let's move on to the next slide, Megan. All right. These are your additional resources. That concludes our workshop. We can spend the next few minutes. If you have any questions, you have any comments or suggestions, please let us know. Thank you all for joining our workshop. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much. Before we do go into questions, I do want to cover the role of base camp manager a little bit more in depth. There are only three officer positions in a club that have access as base camp manager: the president, the VP of Ed, and the secretary. And when I was secretary, I didn't do much with base camp manager because our VP of Ed was very good doing pathways and things like that. But why do you think it's important for a secretary to also have access as base camp manager in pathways? And anybody can answer. Please unmute yourself and
for documentation, for correct documentation and points given to the club.
Absolutely. Thank you.
As a backup if the person's on vacation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the chat, Aziz has shared the secretary checklist. There are so many additional resources. Aziz found a whole bunch that he shared with me, even just looking around and doing some research. There are so many resources and materials available to read so you really understand what your role is. And I see a add to the meeting minutes. That is an excellent question. Does anyone have experience recording their meetings that they've been doing online? Because the first time recording a meeting actually came to my attention was last night when Aziz mentioned that that's a good way to help supplement your notes. I hadn't even thought of that in this era of online meetings, but that is an excellent way to help catch up. I mean, it's just like when you're in school, if you record your lectures, you go back and you listen to your professor again, it helps you miss things that you might, or catch things you might have missed. So recording your meetings, it depends on if you're meeting in a Zoom platform or another platform. But if you're in a Zoom platform, there is a button at the bottom of your screen, usually. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the slideshow. There's, when you are in a Zoom meeting, at the bottom of your screen, there is a recording button. And so you can record your meeting. You can record your meeting from the very beginning. And after the meeting is over, you will receive a link, an email link, and your recording will be there and available to you. And you can share that recording. You can upload it to YouTube. You can email it out. So that way everyone has access to the recording. And as you see in the chat, Aziz has been sharing some of those resources that are very detailed and very helpful. And that's all I wanted to say about Basecamp management. Does anyone have any questions, comments, any tips or tricks or strategies that they want to share? Okay, I see another question in the chat. Do you need to be host to record meeting? That is a very good question. Does anyone have?
Yes,
any,
you do have to be a host. And Rayshawn is recording this, and he will, it will be forwarded to the district.
With online meetings, what portion of secretary roles and responsibilities are not possible that we have to resume when we get to the usual meeting room?
Means of accomplishing some tasks is different. So having people sign into a guest book is, you know, you don't have a physical guest book to sign into, though you still have the ability to ask guests to identify themselves. So several of them are different.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yes,
Does anyone else have a different take on that question?
Yes, I agree with what he just said. And during in-person meetings, to put a guest name or guest list sheet there on the table, and when a guest walks in, you ask that guest to write their names and their emails and contact number. So next time you try to touch base with them, ask them about the meeting, how did they like it, and later on you can invite them to sign up. So how do I do that as a club secretary when we meet on Zoom? Well, what I think what we did today with the job form that was there, we might, that's probably a topic that can be discussed with the club officers if they decide that during this year going to meet on Zoom for any reason, then we should find a way to keep a record of people joining online, that code their name, their emails, or their contact information in general.
If it's before, we could advertise on Facebook and so forth, and guests would hopefully come. But now it's a little tricky because you don't want to put your Zoom number out there for anyone because there's such a thing as Zoom bombing. So somehow we want to invite guests, but only guests that won't Zoom bomb us.
Right. Yes, you don't want some call it guests who are not welcomed. Yeah, that's a good issue. And with Zoom, Yes, well, guests must contact the president or the vice president of membership if they want to attend the meeting by sending an email. And there is something that should be described on the Toastmasters.org on the club page. That's how the club advertises themselves. So we are an open club. We meet on Zoom. If you would like to join, then send us an email. And then we'll send you the Zoom meeting information, the Zoom meeting ID, and the password. So we make sure the person attending that meeting is called a real person, not a hacker or someone else who we don't want to be here in the meeting or disrupt the meeting.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Absolutely. And adding on to that, Preeti has added to the chat that their club puts a jot form on the website. It's a part of their process to have guests visit the club. And so they share the Zoom link after the VP of membership has made that initial contact and the guest has agreed to come visit. So they've almost set up like an appointment to come. So thank you, Preeti, for sharing how your club does it.
One of the things that I do is, as opposed to having full meeting minutes from the executive committee meetings, I send out a link to those meeting minutes, but then my email just lists the action items, because I know not everybody is going to go back and read all the gory detail, right? Particularly because I was at the meeting, I know what happened. What do I need to go read the meeting minutes for, right? But it does prompt everybody to say, oh yeah, I better add those things to my to-do list because I just, there's the action items and they're handy and in front of them.
That is an excellent suggestion that I had never even considered or thought of that before. My meeting minutes, I just looked up some of my past meeting minutes that I used to do, and my meeting minutes are very, very, very detailed. And so that's a good point, is not everybody has time or is interested in all of that detail. So that's a really good suggestion. Thank you so much for sharing that.
That's something also that happened to me as a club secretary. We had to call it a club officer meeting, and so we agreed on that meeting to use Slack application. So we and Slack has some hashtags that are called channels, and each channel I named it called club meeting on X date, and I put in the meeting minutes on a regular basis. And then after some time, I noticed that I haven't received any inputs from other club officers, and maybe only very, very few have ever looked at them or read them. Then I thought maybe if Slack isn't really their thing or not familiar with it or not, I'm not able to get their attention, then how about to switch over, just send an email. But I put my minutes, not as detailed, especially like Megan said, action items, some meeting recaps. I circulated with everyone and started getting some responses. So yes, of course, you as a club secretary, when you keep your record, you want people to read it. You don't keep them for yourself. You want to share it with others. And when you share it, you want to have some other inputs. Remember, as a club secretary, sometimes you might miss very important points during a meeting because you're taking notes and listening at the same time. That's not an easy thing to do. You learn it with, of course, with experience. I'm not saying that I'm perfect note taker. At the beginning, it was very hard for me, but over time, I learned just to write some important keywords that helps me remember. Then in my own time, I write called complete sentences, put them together, organize them, and then send them over. And you as a club secretary, you want to share what you think is really called readable with other people. That's my way of doing it.
I see in the chat, Anne has shared that there's experience being secretary a few times, so she created a form to fill out each week, and that's another good way to do it. when I went through my secretary training, I was shown a lot of different templates and forms that you can use and you can adapt. So there's a lot of different templates for taking notes, translating minutes and what meeting minutes should look like. There's a lot of different forms that you can use that can help you out. So you're not just using notebook paper and trying to, you're not reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of resources out there that you can use and adapt for yourself and for your club.
Yes, you're absolutely right. For the club secretary role, probably can be obvious for many people. And probably being a secretary is probably something you know from experience at your workplace. You know, they call the CEO secretary. What does he or she do? What are the responsibilities? So here go a Toastmaster gives you a chance to work on your leadership skills, being a club secretary. You never know, maybe one day you will end up being a secretary at your own organization or firm, or you never become a manager or a CEO. So if you have done it before, then you can tell your expectations. What can you expect from your secretary? And I think Toastmaster is a really great experience when it comes to leadership.
Absolutely, Aziz. And I'll just add, you know, I mentioned earlier about active listening skills. One of the most rewarding things that I took away from my secretary role, I have developed a lot better active listening skills and the ability to really listen to what people need and what their concerns are and what action items and collaboration can come from the team. So my listening skills significantly improved as a result of my role as the secretary.
You learned by doing, Megan. Awesome.
If you have any other questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're friendly, we're willing to help and help you in any way we can. So thank you so much for joining us for secretary training today. I look forward to meeting you in person when we can do that again and Toastmastering with you all. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.